Well, we know what Brighton and Hastings look like now, but what if the dreams and schemes of two of the main architects had gone all the way? Brighton and Hastings. In their prime, these were the Monte Carlo and Nice of their time. But these resorts weren't just a playground for the rich. Architects loved them too. They were places that welcomed radical and quirky ideas, designs that might look out of place inland, but somehow suited the seaside. I'm taking a look at the grand plans of two men you've probably never heard of, but the chances are if you live along the Sussex coast, you see their work every day. The first is Brighton's forgotten architect, instrumental in shaping the city as we know it. Today I'm going to take a walk on the wild side. Eamon Henry Wilds, to be precise, responsible for building much of Regency Brighton. David Robson is vice chairman of Brighton's Regency Society. He says Wilds doesn't get the recognition he deserves.
You can't walk around the centre of Brighton without passing his buildings.
The early part of the 19th century, known as the Regency period, was when Brighton blossomed, transforming from a small fishing village into a large and fashionable town.
This was a place for fun, and the architecture reflects that.
Brighton soon became the Prince Regent's favourite destination outside of London. He built the famous pavilion, helping to make the town fashionable and creating an early 19th century property boom. Always full of pioneering ideas, Eamon Henry Wilds designed the first square by the seaside, enabling more homes to have a sea view.
So important was this idea of having the room with a view that they started using bow windows. And then the whole front of the house was bowed. So for the first time, you get a bow front.
But as is true of all architects, many of Wilds' ambitious plans never even made it off the drawing board. Kevin Bacon is from Brighton and Hove Pavilion Museum.
This is a selection of prints that we have in the Royal Pavilion Museum's collections, which don't record necessarily what was there, but what might have been. This is a scheme that didn't come off by Eamon Henry Wilds. It was originally a proposal for a grand estate stretching from the seafront, where Oriental Place is now, stretching north over Western Road, one of the main shopping streets in Brighton.
A very interesting man called Henry Phillips, who was a horticulturalist, came up with the idea to build a sort of tropical garden with a glass house in the middle. And that glass house would have been a huge glass version of the Brighton Pavilion. So it was in a sort of Oriental style. And in the end, they only raised enough money to build the 2 rows of houses, and the whole dome project failed.
But a few years later, another opportunity arose to build something very similar. It would have been an Eden project or Millennium Dome of its day.
It would have been the biggest glass dome in the world.
But as it was nearing its opening, there was a falling out because the contractor wanted to remove the supporting pillar. Wilds resigned from the job. The pillar was taken away, and within 24 hours the dome came crashing down.
It became a tangled mess of steel and glass, and it remained. Nobody was prepared to shift it, and it stayed there for 20 years. It was the West Pier of its day, this huge mass of metal from the structure.
100 years after the Regency period ended, another innovative architect brought his radical vision to a town just along the coast. Although Hastings was a popular seaside resort, by the late 1920s it was struggling. But borough engineer Sidney Little had a vision for the future. Andre Palfrey Martin believes Little was a revolutionary.
He completely took the whole of the front line of Hastings and modernised it He brought it into the 1930s, screaming sometimes, I understand.
Little's favourite building material, believe it or not, was reinforced concrete, and that earned him the title the Concrete King, using it to build, among other things, a two-tier promenade.
These bays would have been glazed in because he had glass shutters that could move round so people could sit in the sunshine enjoying themselves.
But Sydney didn't want his new promenade littered with cars, so he built a place to put them.
Underground car parks in the 1930s? How visionary was that? How many people had cars? So you've got to ask yourself, who was he attracting to come to stay in Hastings? People with money.
As well as attracting the rich to Hastings, Sydney cashed in on the sun worshippers too. The Hastings and St Leonard's bathing pool was one of the biggest in Europe. It opened in 1933, attracting around 30,000 visitors on its first day. Sadly, it suffered a slow decline and it was filled in the 1990s. But one of Sydney Little's grandest plans wasn't actually realised.
We came to a city, its name Hastings. Clean streets, modern buildings, traffic well controlled. It is a place where vision and the planners have worked together, where the result is pleasing, futuristic and safe.
Sydney had a vision of a town centre on two tiers. He actually presented a plan to the council. He was told, Mr. Little, we implore you to repair the town, not to build new ones. So unfortunately, that never got off the drawing board. But it would have been wonderful.
Here is a double-decker town of tomorrow.
Little's ambition for Hastings was cut short when World War II broke out, and he joined the Admiralty, where his expertise was called upon to design the concrete mulberry harbours used in the D-Day landings.
Vast artificial harbours, secretly prefabricated in Britain by thousands of workers, helped to make possible the invasion of Normandy.
Today, much of what Sydney Little and Eamon Henry Wilds built does survive. But many would like to see the buildings revived and protected, and the foresight and legacy of the two men properly celebrated.
Maybe someone somewhere will look at this part of the front line and say, well, perhaps we can spend some money on it. I know there will be an awful lot of people in the town would be very, very happy.
I'm struck by just how scruffy Brighton looks. This wouldn't happen in a place like Bath. It wouldn't happen on the continent. And I think now there's a very strong case for Brighton and Hove, the city, to seek World Heritage status.